So this model of education, according to CB, which is the Council of Independent Black Institutions, and they are the umbrella organization to independent black schools, and they came up with 10 tenets, and I didn't give you all of them, because that would be 6 minutes, right? But I pulled out the 4 that were significant to the research that I did, and I'm posting them here. The council said that, look, an African-centered education has to acknowledge African spirituality as an essential aspect of our uniqueness as a people and makes it an instrument of our liberation. 2, it facilitates participation in the affairs of nations and defining or redefining reality on our own terms, in our own time, in our own interests. 3, it prepares Africans for self-reliance, nation maintenance, and nation management in every regard. And 8, can only be systematically facilitated by people who themselves are consciously engaged in the process of African-centered personal transformation. Now that piece right there, kind of, you're like, well, what does that mean? So, what is an African-centered educational model? Number 1, nation building is primary. But we're talking about nation building in terms of African Americans. That's Kujichagulia, self-determination, according to Nguzo. I'm really messing that up. Thank you. Nguzo Zaba, I'm messing that up. Spirituality. Now you know in traditional public schools we can't talk spirituality, right? But that's primary to African people because everything is spirit in African culture. The chair you're sitting in, everything that has atoms that exist as matter, the air you breathe is spirit. Culture. Their culture, knowing what that culture is very significant, and cultural reclamation for all stakeholders. So it's not just about the students, but it's the family and community and teachers. It's reclamation for all people who are involved in the education experience. And that's what the experience did for the school that I interviewed. So what is an African-centered educational model? This educational model requires teachers who are consciously engaged in the African-centered personal transformation, who acknowledge and cultivate the spirituality of African people, and who can deliver the instructions with African-centered background. Now that's primary. That's one of the primary components. Is that, and that doesn't mean you can't be black doing it. It just means that you have to be about knowing who you are, because at the very core, we all from Africa, right? We all are. First mother who we are all tied to came out of Africa. So this is about us. And so there is not just, this is just about black people. No, it's about us. And so, but we have to find out and learn and connect African children, African American children, to who they are as cultural people. And if you ask any little African American child, tell them they're from Africa, it's way back. And I'm not from Africa. So, here's what I did. I did the research, found out what African-centered school was, and so I was looking for an African-centered school. And I found one, there were several down in Detroit. They no longer exist today, but they existed when I did the research. And it was a charter school at the time, but it had spent like 40 of its years as an independent black institution. So it was well established as an African-centered school. In fact, the founder had worked with CD, the Council of Independent Black Institutions, to develop those tenets for what it takes to be an African-centered school. They became a charter school thinking that they would, receiving the funds would allow them to open themselves up to assist more students and families. Well, they didn't realize it's like selling your soul to the devil. I'm sorry, I didn't put it like that. But once they opened themselves up, then they had to meet the mandates of the state and the federal government, which meant that they could no longer focus on the African-centered components of it. And they began to just gradually, the students were going to college and just gradually found themselves at the bottom of the ladder in the state of Michigan. To the point where its chartering company, which was Central Michigan University, may close them down. And not only them, but another chartering company, another African-centered school in Detroit, Anson was also shut down as a result of just their scores. When they became a charter, they had to meet the state mandates. They could no longer focus on African-centered component, which created a incongruence between what their purpose was and what the state and was demanding. All right, so here's my question that guided me. So I found an informant. I went into the school. I can talk about it now. I couldn't talk about it then. I went into Aisha Chile, an African-centered school in Detroit, and I identified the random something. I don't really need the scientific part. I identified some students who had had the experience from K through 12. And they had graduated at the time, so I had to find them. And we sat down, I interviewed them, their families, and we talked about the experience. I didn't call it an African-centered experience, I just asked them what did they think about their educational experience. And from the data collected, this is what formulated this information I'm about to show you today, okay? So my guiding question was, what were the experiences of African-American young people who attended an African-centered school for the majority of their educational career? They attended it from either K through 12 or from 2nd through 12th grade, but it was the majority of their educational experiences. And what else can I say about it? Their parents were the ones who founded the schools for them. The parents were the ones who wanted the children to have the experience. Not all the parents were African-centered or had to focus on African-centered in their culture, but learned to be, as a result of their children going to school, they themselves, because the parents had to come into the school and work in the school, they themselves also received the education, also received the experience of learning about African culture and African reclamation and African reculturalization. So here we go. So who were they? And I told you pretty much that I had 7 students that I looked at. I interviewed their parents for triangulation because I just want to make sure what the kids were saying, the parents, could substantiate. And so you can see their years of graduation here. All of them went on to college, whether it was 4 years or 2 years. I did not look for that. It's just that the young people that were graduating, they went on because that was the culture. That was that was what they were taught. They went on to college as well. Okay, so the educational outcomes. Now I'm going to talk about the shoelace. See, I told you what the Council of Independent Black Institutions, what they said was African-centered education. But I'm going to talk about the school itself. And the school said, look, this is what African-centered education is to us. And these are the things that we're going to provide for these young people. So they said that they would provide an education system that would be grounded in the concept of African nation building. They would provide an educational experience that would cultivate African cultural knowledge and identity. They would provide an educational experience that cultivated the principles of self-advocacy and developed personhood. Now that's what the school said. They had it written up in their brochure. Okay. So now, what I'm doing now is an evaluative study, right? Because I have what CB says the experience should be. I have what the school itself has declared that the experience would be. So now I'm going to ask the young folks, well, what was this experience? And from there, I gathered the data. So when I looked at the first tenet that said, well, we're going to provide an educational experience grounded in the concept of nation building. So there were 2 themes that emerged. It was nation building, family, and community. So I'd be here all day if I tried to show you all of these. So I just highlighted some just so you know. Now, let me just say, family and community is very important in African-centered school. The teachers are called Baba, the male teachers are Baba, and the female teachers are Mama. And when the students in school, there's an ownership. African culture believes that the children belong to the community. And so everybody is the mama of the child, everybody is the Baba of the child, not like how we do now. But that creates a concern about that child. You become very involved. There was a family where the mother became critically ill, where she was paralyzed from the neck down. There were 3 children who went to Aisha Chile. The teachers adopted the family. They would go and comb the hair of the girl. They would make sure that the family would would eat. And the young man that I interviewed, when he was 12 years old, he was carrying his mother up and down the stairs at 12. And he was taking care of his younger sibling. He was cooking. He was giving his mother baths. So that gives you an indication of, in his young years, of the responsibility that was placed upon him. But he didn't have to do that by himself because the school adopted him. And they took on those responsibilities for himself. And so family and community is believed to be the very core of a nation. You can't have a nation without family first and community. So those were primary. So nation building, here's a quote. Now one of the students I interviewed said, and this is how they spoke to me, so I don't clean it up too much, so you have it just the way it was. I remember one of the assignments that we had, and I think that we were talking about a Declaration of Independence or a Constitution for African people. The whole idea was how we foresee ourselves as an independent African nation and what that would be. That's what heads of states do. That's what people who are designing policies and implementing policies that affect entire nations and the entire world. That's what those kinds of people do. But we were never taught explicitly, certainly, that neither implicitly, that we did not belong to that group. But we are responsible for redesigning and then implementing new policies and new ways of thinking and a new way of being and a new way of teaching and a new way of living. That's the experience that they were having. They were in class learning how to create nations. We don't get that in a traditional public school here, right? But this is the experience that they were having, which they are entitled to, right? This is running a nation. So they were learning, they would be given, one of the young people said that they would be given a nation fabulous kind of family, where they would be given, like what the resources were, how many people they had. And they had to create policies for their nation, which is powerful. And these were, they were from K through 8th grade, then they gradually went up to 12th grade. So these were young, but at the time they were doing this, they were K through 8. So these were young beings doing this, right? Which I'm like, I don't know how to do that even today. And they were having that experience. They said that the education experience would cultivate African cultural knowledge. Now there were several ways that they did that. They did it through cultural proficiency, positive self-esteem, expectation for greatness, higher order thinking. Now our schools talk about, we believe that the children are great. But one of the issues that research has shown that teachers have is that they don't have high expectations for these children. The school, Aisha Shalay, was called the school for the gifted. The founder said, every child is gifted. It's about finding the gift of the child. So when the children come into the school, everyone, it doesn't matter whether they're special, they were all gifted, and they were treated as such. And higher order thinking was just an expectation, right? And so the founder of the school, she taught over at Wayne State, and she would have them do research papers for college. Now they're in the 8th grade, and if it wasn't right, they had to redo it. And so they were telling us that we were doing research papers where we had to do APA format, we had to cite, and it had to be right, otherwise she make us do it over again. So they knew that there were high expectations for them. I'm gonna see if I can read for higher order thinking, just a quote here, real quick. So just reading it in a book doesn't really help me to understand. So that's a part of the African-centered curriculum in the class, incorporating things in the class that help each child in their particular learning style. Like the Wallamu, the teachers would call it the Wallamu. She had us build this house so that we could apply the things that we were learning instead of just arbitrarily looking at them on paper. So we had to incorporate certain angles in the house and do certain things with the algebra class we were learning. And we also had to talk about the materials that we would be using and where we would get them from and where we would build them and what would happen to our environment if we put that house there. And so not just, I'm going to go clear acres and acres of land of all these trees and where all these animals are going to live. What happened to that environment there, how am I going to be able to live harmoniously because we are all because we are the dominant life form, but all the other animals have just as much of a right to live here as everybody else. That's part of the African-centered idea that, they gave us. Is yes, we're the dominant life form, and we're thinking beings, and we seem to run off more than just instinct, but that doesn't give us any more right to be here than anything else. I think that, it's really critical that we think about our planet, I call it the planet, Mother Earth, that we think about that. But they're having an educational experience where, they're thinking about, if I place that house there, how does that affect the ecological system? That's powerful. Now, it's powerful for me because I didn't get that when I was in school. I don't know, maybe y'all did, and I'm really more power to y'all. But I didn't get that. And I don't know, as I'm in school, I don't know young people that are having that. Maybe more so now with place-based learning. But there was a time when that was just not the case. So with positive self-esteem, here's a quote the young lady, one of the young persons gave me. You always, or at least almost always, are able to maintain your identity regardless of the space, environment, or the venue in which you find yourself. You are who you are in everything. And even if you don't own the space and time, you never lose yourself. You always own yourself because you have learned the value of what it means to be who you were, who you are, where you are. So when young people went to college after having this experience, and remember, I'm interviewing them, they're graduating, they're in college. So when they're in college, they say, I'm not going into college trying to figure out who I am, right? I know who I am. So I'm going into college and I'm looking around, I'm having to help other, young African Americans who come in there and they don't understand who they are, why they're there. I know who I am, and it doesn't matter where I go, I always know who I am. I own my place, and I think that's powerful in terms of, our young people today, because our African American children don't know who they are. Many of them, let me say that, let me not qualify. Many of them, let me not generalize, many of them don't. They said they would give them an educational experience that cultivated the principles of self-advocacy. Now these students did activism, and they did operating student agency. I'm going to show you the quote on student agency, activism. But let me tell you a little bit about student agency. Because they were independent Black institutions for most of their career, these students were. They were still in the school when they converted to a charter school. So they were getting students that were coming that were not specifically interested in African-centered education. They wanted to come because it was a good education. They knew it was good education. So parents were putting their children into the school. And the young people themselves that were there, that were in the higher grades, they created a tribunal where they were the ones who oversaw the behaviors of the other students. And so they checked them. And they even made decisions, and there were a few that they went to the principal, the founder, and said, look, this one can't stay. We think and we suggest that this one be told they can no longer come. So there were a couple of students that they actually, not thought, wow, y'all had a little power, They actually were able to suggest to the founder that these students, because of their behavior, because they did not appreciate coming to their school and their educational experience, they suggested that they choose another school to go to. So it wasn't the adults. So what's significant about that is you teach young people how to manage and control, if we want to use that, themselves, right? And you give them the opportunity to do that. So let's talk about agency, activism, because that was agency. Activism is where they went and they were able to join in the protest. And here it says, but we always had to understand what Black people were doing at the time. Where were people at this time? How did these events affect Black people? I think that probably more than anything else, that is what made us an African-centered school. We were always looking at current events, what was going on. I always remember writing letters and campaigning to free Nelson Mandela. Whatever was going on in politics, we knew about it, and we didn't just know about it, but we were doing something about it. However we could at that age. They were training us to be activists from the very beginning, and we always felt empowered to act and to actually change circumstances. So when he was free, we felt like we had done something, like we had ownership and we had participated in a way. So in that sense, activism was just instilled in us. So I think that's why I feel so committed to serving a cause greater than myself, because I feel like I can. So these young people, they helped to free Nelson Mandela. And in fact, when he was released and he came to the United States, to Detroit, they were there drumming and dancing for Nelson Mandela. So that was something that they did and they had the experience of, and it impacted them. Not only that, when they went to major universities, like one of the students, I think it's in here, but one of the students, alumni, went to a major university, and she was part of a protest for getting faculty of color. And so they called back and asked the founder to bring the young people up to protest with them. So the founders and the parents loaded up the young people in the car. And they went to Ann Arbor and they protest. And they were on the news and everything, but they joined in that protest. So they learned at a very early age that they had power of agency, that they could be history makers and that they could make change. And they were not afraid to do it. When you teach young people how you can make this change and you don't need permission, you can just do this, and I'm modeling this to you. Right. So the educational experience that developed their personhood. And as I said to you, for African culture, in the community, the child belongs to the community. So when the child comes in, life is cyclical. So it's not linear like Western culture. Right? Life is cyclical in African culture. So when the elder is worship, not worship, that's a strong word, is held in, give me a word, honor and revered. Yes, he could. And so the elder is revered. Why? Because it's understood that the elder is, when the elder transitions, the elder becomes the ancestor and watches over. So the elder is honored and revered. So that the child, when it comes through, is just an elder coming back in, right? And so that child is given a name oftentimes after an elder that has left. So this life is very cyclical. So when the child comes in, the child is purpose. It's not happenstance or arbitrary. The child shows up. The child is in the community for a reason. And so the shaman has to study the child along with the family to understand what the child's purpose is, and they help the child develop into their purpose. So that child is not running around like, mom said, I don't use a mistake. That's not what happens. Children are very purposeful. And so with that, spirituality is very purposeful. Rites of passage. That's how they help develop in the personhood. You guys understand rites of passage? That's what high school generally do, right? That's where you go to high school, you graduate, you're an adult, right? It's always you're an adult. But they have rites of passage where, they take them to places and they take them through ritual and they take them through struggle. And the men take the young men. And the men, not just the fathers, but the men in the community take the young men off and use this camera. And they have that experience. And the women take the young women and the women of the community, and they assist the young women into going through their rites of passage. And then life values. Life values is from the Nguzu Sala said, right? But it's the 7 principles of Maya. And those are the principles for life. It's honesty, integrity, justice. And those were the values that they were given